So previously we covered a little bit of some wound care advice, and I thought it'd be helpful to take a second to do some essential first aid, life-saving type techniques. You might have heard of like CPR and things like that. That will be helpful if, you know, we talked about the bike accident. If you ever were like biking and you came across some poor guy who was like face down on the ground, no one else around, you don't know what to do. This is something that you can do in the field, as we call it, so like outside of the hospital. This is something you can do in the field to help possibly save someone's life when you don't necessarily know what's going on, but they might be dying. So some helpful techniques. The way to think about it is really easy. It's just ABC. So the ABCs are the essential life-saving things you have to think about when you find a man down or when someone's not doing so well. The A stands for airway, the B stands for breathing, and the C stands for circulation. So I'll cover all of those in turn, and I'll discuss what we would want to do about it. And one thing to keep in mind is that a lot of this is geared towards the hospital, so there's not always a lot that you'd be able to do outside of the hospital. And that's why the first most important step in all of this is always call 911. So if you think something's wrong, you have to call 911 to get someone to a place where they have the right tools and machines to be able to really save someone's life. But without further ado, here's what you can do in the field if you ever find someone down. We'll start with airway, and a lot of airway is related to the hospital, but there are some examples of things you can do in the field. So if, let's say I was biking along and I got hungry, so I started to eat my energy bar, and because I'm biking, I'm working really hard, so I'm breathing really hard, and I accidentally breathed my bite of energy bar down into my throat. So instead of going down the esophagus, which connects to my stomach, it goes down to my trachea, which connects to my lungs. Now I can't breathe, and I'm not getting any oxygen to my brain or the rest of my body. So I'm kind of dying, and I pass out, fall off my bike, and I'm laying down there on the floor. And that's when, someone discovers me. So the first step is to make sure if their airway looks okay. And one of the things you can do is you can open their mouth and just kind of peer in. So when you open my mouth, you look in and you see this big hunk of energy bar sitting there. And you can go in and try and take it out to clear my airway. But you have to be really careful, because when you try and take out a physical obstruction, a foreign object from an airway, you risk pushing it back farther. So you actually have to be really careful when you're trying to clear someone's airway. But if there is a mechanical obstruction, you want to be able to try and get it out of the way. So if it's possible, you can also do the Heimlich maneuver, which is, I don't know if you've learned it before, but that's what you do when someone's choking on food, like in a restaurant or something, and that's where you get behind someone and you pull in. So if this is my stomach, my ribs are here, my stomach's right here. So you make a little fist against someone's stomach and use your other hand to give yourself some extra force, and you basically push in. I just ate, so I'm not going to do it that hard. You push in and up, under the ribs, and you're trying to essentially force that person to cough. It's kind of the same. When you cough, that's basically the same thing that's happening in your body, and that can generate enough force to hopefully get that object out.
Using our technique, the Heimlich maneuver, like Mr. Kartub said, if Mr. Kartub was choking, or if anyone was choking, you could take your hand like this, and then you're going to support it with your other hand like that. You're going to wrap it around, and you're going to make sure that you're not hitting their ribs, but below on the stomach, like that, like that.
If you hit the ribs, it's not going to do much.
And then you push up.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and you have to get behind someone, usually, to generate enough force. So if I was biking, and if I was down, and if you came across me, and I'm just lying face down, you might find it easiest to try and lift me up and actually maybe throw me over my bike or your bike, because it helps to have someone in a somewhat upright position. Actually, just on the subject, if you are ever alone and you're choking, you can do a self Heimlich, where you kind of get that same part of your stomach on like a chair, like the back of a chair, and you do the same motion where you just pretty much smash your stomach down against the chair. And that is something you can do if you're ever alone and choking and you don't have someone to do the Heimlich for you. So that's an example of how you clear someone's airway.
Okay.
Okay, so we covered airway. What to do if someone has an obstructed airway.
Could we go over what the word obstructed means?
Sure, an obstruction is just something that's blocking. So when we breathe, we have to get air from the outside down into our lungs through our throat. But if you choke on food, I'm sure everyone here's choked on food at least once in their life. That's where you get food into your airway, and when it blocks your airway, you can't get air through to your lungs, which means it can't go to your body, and it can't go to your brain, it can't go to your heart. So that is an obstruction. If you have an obstructed airway, where you have something blocking the flow of air, you're not getting oxygen, and you'll die. So if you ever find someone who has an obstructed airway, you can use the Heimlich to relieve that obstruction and get a clear path for air to flow. So that's the A, airway. The next one, B, for breathing, and C for circulation, we might cover together, because that's when you do CPR, you're essentially covering breathing and circulation. So, very nice. Let's say, same example, biking along, except this time I didn't choke on my energy bar, I had like a heart attack. So, I have a heart attack right on my bike, and now my heart's not pumping any blood to my body, so my brain's not getting any blood, so everything kind of shuts down. And that means that your muscles don't work, your lungs don't work, your brain doesn't really work. So I would be, again, I'd probably fall off my bike, I'd be laying down, face down in the mud, and that's when you come upon me. And the first thing to do, and really actually you would do this even for the airway one earlier, other than call 911, is you would check a pulse. And we'll run through an example of all of this, but you want to check a pulse. And on me, because I just had that heart attack, you're probably not going to find a pulse. And you're also going to look and see if I'm breathing. And the way to see if someone's breathing, there's a couple ways.
You can feel if they're breathing out their nose. You can feel. You can look for nostril flaring or signs with the neck and the shoulders. You can kind of see.
Breath, or you can look for what's called chest rise. So if you found me down in the mud, you might flip me over and look to see if my chest is rising and expanding. And because I just had a heart attack, you notice that it's not. And you don't feel a pulse. The easiest pulses to feel are these ones that are right on the side of your neck here, called the carotid pulses. And if you just stick your finger in a centimeter or two, you can feel it without too much difficulty. So you check for a pulse, you don't feel one. You check for breathing, and I'm not breathing. So then you'd start CPR. And CPR is basically designed to mimic the action of the heart. So you will be pushing on my chest and compressing my heart, kind of the way the heart compresses naturally when it squeezes. So you'll be doing the squeezing for me. And by squeezing my heart for me, as well as providing rescue breaths, which we'll also cover, you are mimicking the normal beating of the heart and breathing that I would be doing. And because you called 911, help is on the way, and you are essentially trying to just extend my life by getting blood to my brain, basically, and heart. And that's the most important part, to keep me alive until the paramedics come. That's the point of CPR, is to keep someone alive until they can make it to a more advanced level of care. And the only things you need to do that are to simulate the heart and the lungs. So, the tenets behind CPR are chest compressions and rescue breaths.
Oh, you can keep talking.
Okay. So chest compressions...
What does a compression mean?
Compression is to squeeze. So because my heart's not beating on its own, we have to beat for me. And that means pushing down on my chest. And they always say when you want to get down like 2 inches, which is a fair amount. Usually when you do CPR, like in the hospital, you have to break ribs, to give you an idea of how far you have to be chest compressioning.